it's amazing what you can achieve when you don't care who gets the credit.
It's easy to train technical capability. It is nearly impossible to train fit.
I think once you let go of that, you can become a much happier person, much happier.
At the end of the day, most of the work that we do, especially in kind of an age of social media, is relatively disposable. It'll have a shelf life of a couple of weeks, a couple of months. So the only thing you really get out of the time you spend doing this work is, the work that you do and the people that you do it with.
Welcome back to the second series of Unfiltered, brought to you by The Growth Distillery. This is the show where we celebrate the imperfect, the unvarnished, and the unashamedly raw journeys that shape our growth. This time round, though, we're shaking things up. We're widening our focus to spotlight one of the most essential yet often overlooked ingredients for success: the incredible people who walk alongside us. From mentors to rivals, colleagues to co-founders, we're bringing you dynamic duos who've propelled each other forward through thick and thin. So buckle up, this series is going to be bigger, bolder, and this time thanks to our friends at the Marketing Academy Global. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered, and this is one I've been particularly excited for. I am joined by Gabby Gray, Executive Director at Oliver Plus, and Peter van Jaarsveld, Managing Director of Oliver Plus and Global Head of Production at Oliver. For those dialing in from home, Oliver is the world's first and only company to exclusively design, build and run bespoke in-house agencies and marketing ecosystems for brands. And they've been a meteoric success. They were ranked number one in Adweek's fastest growing agencies back in 2012 and have built on that success since then. Gabby and Peter first worked together, though, in 2012 when she joined what is now Oliver Plus, establishing the creative team that would go from 30 people in Johannesburg to over 700 people worldwide. And since then, well, they've kept in touch. In fact, as a duo, their partnership was so effective that they drew up a long-term contract, got married, produced 2 new team members, and then, to really spice things up, decided to relocate family operations to the UK a couple of years ago. Gabby, Pete, thank you so much for joining us. I feel as though your story was written for this podcast.
You make it sound a lot more exciting than it felt.
Absolutely. And very rational and linear and controlled, which, it obviously was.
Yeah, not chaotic or crazy at all.
Let's start with, what's the B-side to that story? I mean, it's such a beautiful scenic route that the two of you have taken. What's the grit beneath the surface on this?
Oof. That's a great first question.
and grit, I'd say grit is probably exactly the word beneath that. I think, you go back to 2012, 13, 14 odd years, a small business in South Africa. It's, grit is exactly the journey, it's lots and lots and lots of very, very hard work and tenacity under the surface that I think just slowly builds momentum. And eventually I think we were very, very fortunate that, as we kind of picked up momentum, that we were ready to face that and kind of take advantage of it. And but I'm going to go back, grit is the word. It's certainly not been, it's been scenic, but not necessarily easy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's a memory from your initial foray that still makes you smile or cringe?
Too many cringeworthy ones to actually to pinpoint a single one. A single memory, I think, probably the first time that I met Pete. So interestingly, I was hired by Pete's business partner. So I didn't meet Pete for the first 6 months of us technically working together. He was living in the UK at the time, and I had been hired in Johannesburg by his business partner, and I was working with him. And they always spoke about Pete in these like reverential tones, and I thought he was this 65-year-old, gray-haired, like old and wise dude, with the way people spoke about him at the office. So then when after 6 months in strolled this cocky, dark-haired guy who was in his mid-30s, I was like, well, who's this guy? And I was like, hi, I'm Gabby. And he kind of skateboarded up to me and was like, hey, what's up? And then skateboarded away, I think. And that was the first time I met him. And I still laugh about that because it's pretty hilarious that guy is now my husband 10 years later. So yeah, 12 years
and
later.
now he's also 65, which is, fantastic. And quite great.
Yeah.
For me, as someone that, hand on heart, struggled to boil an egg with his wife, shout out Jess, I love you to pieces. I'm fascinated by how you guys make this work, right? You know, it's not as though you're two co-founders. It's not your business per se. You are executive colleagues, but at the same point in time have to juggle this dynamic between marital life and then professional collegiate camaraderie. How does that, like, are there principles that you've had to adopt to make that work?
I don't think there have been any
think
explicit
so.
principles.
Not explicit, not that we've sat down and
No,
discussed.
but you sort of learn, like, home stays home and work. Actually, work never stays work, to be fair. Work tends to always come home, but the home very rarely goes to work. I think that's definitely been, if we've had a bit of an argument and things are maybe a bit chilly around the house, it'd be amazing how quickly you can switch the charm back on when you go into Teams.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely been one that, yeah, maybe not explicitly, but certainly something we adopted, over the last couple of years to, yeah.
Look, and I
just
think so. Our relationship started as colleagues. It wasn't the other way around. We didn't get together and then start working together. So the basis of our relationship was, the basis of our relationship was colleagues who worked really, really well together, who understood each other really well, who loved working together. I mean, I can remember waking up and thinking, I can't wait to go to work today, because we'd have so much fun. Pete just understood what I was saying and trying to get across whenever we were, riffing ideas and stuff like that. And that's where it kind of blossomed, I guess. And then from there, eventually we came together romantically. But because we had that basis so deeply entrenched in mutual respect at work, and that's where we started. We knew where those guardrails were already, kind of,
Yeah.
And we've always kept that, I hope. I'm sure there are instances, in fact, I know there are instances where, we've both jumped onto a call and I've been furious at him about something and quiet in the corner and everyone's like, Gabby, are you okay? You're very quiet today. But we largely managed to keep the two separate.
Let's anchor to that formative relationship then, because I'd love to hark back and give you an opportunity to share with us, I guess, what you learned from one another. So Gabby and Pete, same question. What's something that you've learned from one another that's changed how you've approached business? Like before there was any, kids, school, nappy changes attached.
I think, Pete, you go first.
Yeah, that's, I want to say there's so much, it's almost impossible to just, I think and it's maybe not one thing, but it's kind of I want to say it's a sort of thread that started weaving itself through how we do everything, but it's just being really, really, what's the word? Strong to fight in what you believe is right and what you believe, is the right answer. Whether that answer is, in our early days, we were worked together creatively before it was, more of a business relationship. And, whether that integrity was around the right call from a creative perspective or from a operational perspective, I think that is probably the one thing that I always lean on Gabby for, is that willingness to just say, I think it should be yellow, and despite what everybody else thinks, and I'm using yellow as an analogy for 1,000 different things here, but I think that's probably the one thing that really, if I had to call out one thing, that'll be it.
A woman of conviction.
Yeah, that's even if she's not necessarily right, which is, sometimes interesting. She's very good.
It's a nice way of saying I can be really fucking stubborn. Yeah,
exactly.
Gabby, what about the gentleman across the screen from you?
So I have to rein it in because I can get quite gushy about Pete, and it's not very professional. But I would say that early on, when I first met Pete, I was a young creative, and I was very attached to my ideas. And I'm sure a lot of young creatives can relate to sometimes their ideas being taken and by other people and run with, and them not getting the credit. And that happened to me a few times early on, and I got really, really upset by it and angry about it. And Pete taught me, you always say, like, there's a million good ideas where that came from. Let them have it, give the good ideas away because you've got more of them, and don't get so I guess attached and don't let it get personal. And I've kind of kept that throughout. If someone, it doesn't matter who gets the credit, basically, because good ideas, they're more, and you will have more. And that's always stayed with me.
I think there's a magic to what the two of you have just said, because Pete's referred to your conviction as this quality of envy, and you've gone his ability to let things go. And I think that there's I think a magic in the yin yang of that, whether or not that was planned or not, but they didn't know the question, so
it wasn't.
Nothing,
but
nothing
I think that's probably the one of the reasons why it works so well, or it has worked so well.
You do need both. You sometimes do need to fight. You sometimes do need to say, actually, we're going to fight for this one. We're not going to let this one go by. And sometimes you got to go, the idea is the easy bit. It's the execution that's really, really hard. So let those ideas go, because there are more.
What's your strategy for navigating conflict? Because I know that, when things happen at home and they get brought to work or vice versa, but having, stronger connective tissue between the two of you, in a professional sense, when there is a principled difference in the way that you're anchoring to someone, to something or someone or some circumstance, how do you go about navigating that?
Do you mean conflict between each other, or conflict kind of
in a professional sense? Because I can imagine that based on, just how much connective tissue the two of you have, if in a work sense there's a disagreement, it's hard to not bring the whole of self. So I'm fascinated as to how you might do that, because I think that there's probably some wisdom for all of us that are playing a lower stakes game than arguing with their wife or with their husband on something that they're probably really passionate about.
I think sorry, you go first. No.
You go first.
After you. No, I was going to say, from my perspective at least, I think there's a respect and understanding of our strengths and weaknesses. So especially in a professional context, even if we disagree about certain things, we'll defer. Because we'll argue, very passionately up until that point, but at some point you've got to make a decision and carry on, and ultimately I think, from my perspective at least, when it's something that I feel Gabby is just, more suited to making the decision, I trust her judgment more than I do mine, or it's professionally her sphere and her realm is defer. I think that's a really important thing, is that you don't undermine each other's there's got to be a respect for, what each brings to the table on a professional level. And I think what's happened over the last few years is, while we started working together, much more as creatives, today my role is much more, operational, and Gabby's role is much more creative. So that immediately creates a bit of a space where actually say, I'm going to argue about this, but actually this is Gabby's call at the end of the day.
And I think the beauty comes from, sorry to interrupt you, I think the beauty comes from that I can argue with him, and that I can call him out in a meeting and say, I'm sorry, but I really strongly disagree with you, without fear or, it getting awkward or what have you, because I think that's important for people to be able to do in an executive leadership, environment. And we can have a discussion about it, and we can laugh because we both are at completely opposite ends of a spectrum. But we can call each other out and say, listen, I strongly disagree with you. We'll do it the way you want to do it, whoever, is deferring in that instance. But this is why. And I think that's, again, an important part of why this works largely. I mean, sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes we do tend to or at least I do, get quite passionately emotional about it. But largely it does work.
And when the heat turns up, do you find yourselves leaning more on each other, or trying to sort of give each other a bit of space and distance?
I think I try and lean on Pete a lot. I'll ask for his advice and what he thinks, because I respect his opinion above all else. But yeah, I definitely think I lean in.
What I look to for Gabby very often is a perspective, So when the pressure gets up, I think being able to chat to, I think it's when you take some of your work challenges home, there's a real benefit to being able to speak to your partner who actually understands the complete context, as opposed to just going,
Bob said this and it irritated me.
Yeah, exactly. Who's Bob? So there's when you start getting to some really chewy problems, there's a real benefit to being able to actually speak to somebody who, A, you obviously really, really respect their opinion, but B, actually understands the context and understands the mission,
Yeah, it's funny because I've got the polar opposite. My wife is a midwife, and I go home and I've got, you wouldn't believe the day I've had. And she goes, "You've had a bad day. Let me tell you about a bad day." And it's and again, I think it's still,
puts it into perspective.
I'm still very lucky that I get that grounding, but I've got what might be a curly one, but I think it's coming from a place of, I think there's so many of us that the sort of the membrane between work and life is now becoming much more blurred. And I think romantic relationships at work are becoming something that shouldn't be stigmatized. And I would hazard a guess that for those that are tuning in, there's going to be someone or a couple of our audience that are going, how would I approach this? Because clearly the two of you have absolutely threaded the needle on what this can look like in a way that is sort of healthy and nourishing at home and at work. What advice would you give them if they're either, thinking about a romantic relationship with someone at work, or they are in a romantic relationship with someone at work and they're just trying to figure out how to navigate it and get to where you guys are?
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing is to not have expectations of the other person in a work context, because that's not fair. I don't expect Pete to back me up or, agree with me all the time or all that kind of stuff just because we're in a relationship. Quite the opposite. I want him to provide an alternate, viewpoint. And I think perhaps a lot of people can get quite sticky because they want that kind of love and support at every level all the time. And you do have to separate it. You are colleagues at work and you are partners at home. And I think the expectations need to differ somewhat. I know that Pete will always give me as objective view as he can at work, and won't do anything that would cloud, the relationship or judgment of the relationship, you know what I mean? So I would say expectation would be a number one thing.
Because it's a Venn diagram, right? There's your personal life and there's your work life. And while they overlap, they are two very distinct environments. And I think you would be very, very careful about how you blur the line between those two because, unfortunately, there are the way that, you operate at work and the decisions that get made there and, some of the, kind of more tense moments there. You have to remember that in each circle of that Venn diagram, there's a North Star, and they're not necessarily the same North Star, and you need to make sure that on each sphere, you're doing right by that environment and that context. And I think when you start confusing those two things, A, you put yourself and your partner in an unfair position, and B, you put the company in an unfair position. You put a lot of people around you in unfair positions when that starts happening. And that can get really uncomfortable and a bit ugly, quite honestly. So yeah, I think that's really probably the most important thing is to remember that they are still two separate things, even if they are sometimes the same.
I think that is some profound advice. Gabby, what trait do you hope you've passed on to Pete that will stand the test of time?
Oof. Wow. That's a big one. What trait do I hope I've passed on to him? I think above all else, love, I think, and an ability to treat, not that he never did this before, but see everyone as close and friend and someone to embrace with, open arms. I'm far more of an emotional kind of huggy, person. Whereas Pete, I think those who meet him initially might find him, a bit quiet and reserved or what have you. And I hope that I have passed on a feeling of embracing people, at face value almost, initially and not hanging back while you get to know them and figure them out and stuff like that. I don't know. Pete, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
we'll get to Pete. Why is that the one trait that you hope you've passed on?
I think it's the one that I guess is top of mind and stands out for me in terms of our differences, because that's fundamentally where we differ. I'm a lot more outgoing, and put myself in situations where I can meet new people and stuff like that. Whereas Pete doesn't necessarily enjoy that kind of thing as much as I do. I would say that's a key kind of differentiator between our personalities. Pete, likes to put his head down and get the work done. He has the most incredible work ethic of anyone that I have ever met. But whilst I try and emulate that work ethic, I like to have fun as well and balance the two, and hope that I've helped bring that balance to Pete's life. Because I think if left to his own devices, Pete would just work, because that's where he's, I guess, most efficient. But yeah, I think that's probably because it's the thing that differentiates us most.
Pete, what's the one trait you hope you've passed on to Gabby that will stand the test of time?
That it's all about the work. Seems so. No, I think the most important one is, and we've spoken about it a little bit, is that at the end of the day, is a sense of perspective, is a sense of, there are more opportunities, there are more things, there's always, we always say we're not saving lives, and I think it's that idea of, letting the ideas go and fighting for what you believe in, but not necessarily fighting for every idea, because you can't fight for everything equally. But maybe also just work is a funny word. We call it work, and sometimes it is work, but most of the time it's not work. And I almost want to say when it becomes work, that's where, maybe the wheels start coming off a little bit. And I think what looks like work very often from the outside is actually just, I don't know what you want to call it. It's just passion. It's just, this interest in just doing things and changing things and moving things forward. And I think, so I think on the one hand is that sense of perspective, but two is that sense that, the great thing about work is that it lets you do things, it lets you make a real difference, it lets you make a real dent in things. I think one of the most amazing things, if you look, back over the last, not only our relationship, but, even further, the businesses we've worked in and built, is how much of a difference it's made for so many people, because, we put in that effort to think really, really hard about the problems, and really like think, sometimes counterintuitively, argue with each other and ourselves about what we're doing and how we do it. And I think maybe that if I could distill that as one thing that I'm hoping I've maybe, imparted is that it's never really done. And I think that's maybe why I'm always working, is because it's never really done.
Again, it's so funny because I think you've both said the same thing in two different ways again. I think, Gabby, you've nailed the brief, Gabby, because what I heard Pete say was to find the love in your work, right? That it's, if you can
Absolutely.
figure out a way that work becomes purposeful and nourishing. And I think what I heard was really, work stops being work when you're contributing, when there's this feeling of
Absolutely.
contribution to something bigger, which is essentially finding the love and the joy in what you're doing anyway. So again, I think it's funny that you've built the bridge from both sides and sort of serendipitously met in the middle. I would like to change gears a bit, because I don't just want to talk about the brilliance that is your relationship, and it is genuinely amazing. I'd love to talk about what you've built together, because clearly you guys are an absolute, clearly the two of you are a force to be reckoned with, where 1 + 1 = 3 at work, right? And so I'd like to talk about the future of marketing, Gabby from as an ECD, and then, Peter, someone that sort of really has to see the whole picture now. Without mentioning AI, what does marketing look like in 5 years, and how is it different?
Well, I'd say collaboration, way more collaboration. For me, I feel like that's waned significantly in recent years, and there's been a tendency to kind of pull back and keep things close. And I feel like we have to bring more opinions in, more expertise, more perspectives, mainly, to see things thrive and see a different way of doing things. So yeah, I think I think more collaboration and less blinkers.
The thing with collaboration is, and we talk about this a lot, is there's in the States recently, essentially an about turn on diversity initiatives in general. And one of the lucky things we've got is we've built this business that is diverse, kind of, from the top down. It's designed to be diverse, and I think we've seen firsthand the benefit of having all these diverse people around the table, contributing and collaborating, to Gabby's point. And something that's been stark for us coming to the UK is how much less diverse it is here than the world that we come from. And I think that the ideas and the work suffer because of that. And ultimately, when you think about the future of marketing and avoiding the two-letter acronym, which if we manage to avoid it for the entire podcast, would probably be a first, for 2025. But is this hope that we can create marketing that is both more relevant and more useful, by kind of getting these diverse inputs and just using technology to our advantage. Sorry, I just interrupted you, but just kind of building on Gabby's point there. So
yeah. But it's worth saying, sorry to interrupt, we keep interrupting you. It's worth just saying that, to that point, the success of the company wasn't just Pete and I. We are part of a broader team that were integral. We could never have done it without the people around us. We didn't do it alone. It wasn't just us. And there are a number of people who collaborated and worked with us, and that's why it was such a success. We did have those diverse opinions. We always put things out to a team of people. We made decisions as a team. There's a whole office in Joburg, in 2019, 2020, who helped us grow internationally. And each and every person who was there was part of that success. So yeah, I just don't want it to come across like Pete and I championed this and did it all on our own together, because it absolutely wasn't the case.
I think that's an asterisk that goes without saying, but I appreciate that you've said it nonetheless. But I want to push you on this, because I think, and I'll phrase it in a way that might give you a bit more permission to answer. If I were to ask your team what the two of you added, what was the magic ingredients that the two of you added to that recipe, knowing that it wasn't the whole cake?
So I can tell you what, I won't name her, but our Gabby will know who I'm speaking about. But she would say that it's Gabby's tenacity and integrity. I'm going to paraphrase her slightly, but because we actually spoke about that a bit earlier today. Gabby's been on mat leave for a couple of months, so you get to see to some degree also
10 months, not a couple of months. 10 months.
I don't want to get the number wrong. So you also learn to use a couple of months as opposed to the specific number, because it's more accurate. But I think that ability to make the right call, even if it's not the popular call, is definitely something that would have come up, and I think she would say that's what you bring, and she would say that what I bring is I don't know what she would say I bring, actually.
Fortunately, we've got Gabby on this call.
I would say that, Pete's a born leader. You only have to spend half an hour in a room with him to know that. And again, I get gushy, so I have to rein it in. But I think that Pete's ability to see things, he transcend a situation and see things for what they will be and what is important, is his superpower. He gets out of the weeds and the minutiae of things, and he gets above a situation and can go, right, this is what we need to do. Do you agree? This is why I think this is going to help or help solve our problem. And you'll see everyone around a table going, yeah, he's right. I think that's absolutely one of his best attributes from a work and leadership perspective.
And when you look at the teams that you hire together, what's the non-negotiable traits every team member has to have that complement, the special sauce from the two of you?
Great.
Well, I think there's the I want to say the real answer, especially going back to our early days, and there's the the more palatable answer. But going back to the earlier days, a lot of it was I want to say unspoken and unwritten. You could, through an interview process and through getting to know somebody, you could tell very, very quickly whether or not you had somebody who gave energy or takes energy. And when you're building a company, what you need is people to give energy. And you can feel very, very quickly in a room if you're dealing with people who are going to give you the energy or take your energy from you. And that's your most critical resource when you're trying to build something, is you can't have people who are taking energy, because they drag you down so fast. And I think it's very hard to quantify that into what is objective hiring parameters. But in our early days,
we've tried doing that.
Yeah, 30, 40, 50 people, and you can be in every interview. You can feel that. I think it's very hard to scale that. And I think,
sorry.
No, but I think that is an authentic answer.
In 2018, 2019, when we hit a really aggressive growth kind of trajectory, we were hiring multiple people a day, and people were coming in, and we were literally saying to them, if you've got your laptop, grab a desk and you can start working right now, kind of thing. We had to develop a very quick way, because we didn't have time for multiple interviews, and a rigorous interview process. So it was a lot of, having all the right people in the room, inviting someone in and getting a feeling for them. And you do develop that sense of a person.
And some of those people are still with us,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Most of those people are still with us today, and they're some of our closest friends, and I think that, speaks volumes for that kind of feeling, that. And whenever we haven't hired a great fit for our company, we've looked back and said, I knew there was
a niggle somewhere. Yeah.
A niggle, but, had a great portfolio, or, there was something in their history that we thought, well, perfect fit, and it hasn't worked out because we haven't listened to that little voice, saying, this doesn't quite gel.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to train technical capability. It is nearly impossible to train fit.
Exactly.
Really. And that fit is the most critical thing, because we can teach technical ability. You can learn technical ability if the character is right. Everything else is sort of secondary. And you look at it, to Gabby's point, some of the people who have been with us, some people I hired as far back as 2008, 2009 are still with us, and their careers have sort of morphed and changed, multiple times over that period, because that attitude was they had the right sort of mental elasticity to come on that journey with us, and like you said, but it's very, very hard to scale that, unless you're in the room. And I think that's it's a really important one.
And move forward a decade, when you're a much bigger beast, many moving parts, does that principle change? Is it still a fit first game, or does the dynamic of who you're looking for once you are a scaled business differ?
Look, I think there's bits of both. We're not working directly with a lot of the people that we hire, or our company hires these days. So I think we rely a lot on, obviously, our colleagues across the world to figure that out for themselves, and oftentimes someone comes through and we're like, well, where's this person from? What do they do? Et cetera, et cetera. And if I look on paper, I think, well, I want to know more about this person, because at face value, I don't think that they necessarily would have, I necessarily would have hired them. But then they work out, and they're some of our best employees, so sometimes we don't get it right, and sometimes we do. And I think as we've grown, to Pete's point about scaling, we've had to let go, because that's the only way. We cannot hire every single person in this business. And I think one of the beautiful things is seeing how much diversity has come from that as well, and how it's grown and taken shape, and, how people have taken our core values as a business and as a team and applied that to their context, and it still, shines through in their way. And that's a really beautiful thing to have seen, 10 years later.
I want to touch on that, because I think that there's a lot of there's a couple of big quantum shifts, or let me rephrase it. I think that there's some really meaningful shifts that you have to make your peace with as you shift into a large scale business from, you know, an agile, smaller, medium-sized enterprise that, you know, that's nimble and where you can have, you know, a microculture that permeates across the business beyond just letting go. What are some of those? What's the Rubicons you've had to cross as you move from a 30-person org to thousands of people across, God, what was it, 70 countries at the moment?
No, not that many. 7. 7. For Oliver Plus at least it's 7. Oliver is in a lot more countries, but don't say in the boardroom. Biggest lesson
That's a solid piece of advice right there. Yeah.
Solid piece of advice.
I feel there's a story behind that. Was that a hard-learned lesson?
It was a hard learn. Yeah, I would not recommend it, especially early on in your career. But yeah, absolutely. There's definitely some hard truths, and I think what we, or at least from my perspective, initially we used to call ourselves like a pirate ship. We were foul-mouthed, as evidenced by the cunt in the boardroom story. Very irreverent, very advertising, 20 years ago. There were lots of stories, lots of parties, all that kind of stuff. And as you grow bigger, you have to remember that doesn't necessarily translate globally. Just because you enjoy that doesn't mean the rest of the world enjoys that. And we've had to find really our essence as a business. And it's not, having fun and throwing tattoo parties and all that, which we used to do. But it's a respect and love of people at the end of the day, and wanting people to enjoy what they do, to Pete's previous point. And that's really at the end of the day what we want to build our culture on. Have people who want to come to work and enjoy working with the people around them, whether that is going to a party or doing a beach cleanup on a Saturday, which is a hugely popular thing that our team, in India do. Whatever the case may be, helping our people find that translation of what means fun and engagement to them. And learning that was a tough lesson, that you couldn't expect everyone to find what you found fun.
Pete?
No, that's a really good. Yeah, it's twee to talk about, culture beating strategy, and culture is a very difficult thing to scale, because you think, like Gabby says, culture is the things that you do, and culture actually isn't the things that you do. It's really the essence of what you believe, and
how you make people feel.
Yeah, exactly, how you make people feel. And I think that need to want to, a very, very long time ago, I said to the team that, at the end of the day, most of the work that we do, especially in kind of an age of social media, is relatively disposable. It'll have a shelf life of a couple of weeks, a couple of months, so the only thing you really get out of the time you spend doing this work is, the work that you do and the people that you do it with, and it's a really important thing to remember. And yeah, as you scale, it's learning that means different things to different people, and that's actually okay. And I think maybe the biggest lesson about growing the business has been to let a lot of things go, is to have as clear a North Star as you could possibly have, but letting a lot of decisions run their course, keeping a bit of an eye on them. Maybe they go a little bit, veer a little bit from where you thought they should go, but giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then, yes, obviously stepping in, if things do go wrong, but actually just letting things develop a little bit, and just seeing organically how people respond and what they build themselves. Because I think, to Gabby's earlier point, that's where you get that real growth and that real diversity, is letting people feel, a sense of ownership and autonomy, or agency at least, in what they do and their journey. And that's not always easy. It is still a business. It's very, very hard to always reconcile those two things. At the end of the day, you have deadlines, you have work that's got to get done, and that has to be the North Star, because if that falls away, there is no ability to do anything else. The beach cleanups go away, the culture goes away if you don't have, if you're not looking after your clients, you're not growing the business in the first instance. The business in the first instance is the enabler of, everything else around it, not the other way around. And they are symbiotic and they are mutually supportive, but it's important
And
that
we've had to
we
have some tough conversations, and navigate some really tough situations with, excuse me, with employees in the past where perhaps our culture's been misconstrued. And whilst we want people to enjoy and have fun, there's still work to be done, and sometimes that will mean, late hours, and sometimes that will mean, doing something that you don't necessarily agree with from a creative perspective or whatever the case is. But it's a really important line to kind of, keep in mind that it's still a business at the end of the day. But yes, we want you to enjoy it, and we want you to feel at home here, and we want you to make sure that you are being welcomed as your full self at work. So yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, across all businesses. It's hard.
Wow. I think there's so much more to Culture Eats strategy for breakfast than people would like to think. But it's rare that I'm quite blown away with the way that that's been articulated by you, Pete, which is, a great strategy and a great culture is actually just millions of micro decisions towards a unifying North Star. And I think that is very, very well put. All right.
There's a saying, by Martin Sorrell used to say, "The mice will get you in the end," and that's always stuck with me. It's the 1,000 small things that actually make the big thing, not the other way around. And if you which is why you can let a couple of things go wrong, because those couple of things are not the whole, but you've got to keep an eye on it, because if you don't bring them back on track, then it can obviously infect the whole. But yeah, it
kind
is
of like the parenting advice. The best parenting advice we've ever received was, don't do something once that you're not willing to do 1,000 times.
Exactly. Yeah.
It applies both ways. Yeah.
Look, I mean, I feel as though there's a whole parenting episode here, and we could chase that rabbit down the warren. But I'm conscious you've got a little one sleeping in the other room. So we're hoping to end every episode of this series with the same big 3+1 questions. I'm going to alternate who gets to go first to give the other member of the duo an opportunity to have a think. So, Pete, I might start with you, and I'll give Gabby a little bit more time on this. What's the single most important question we should be asking ourselves?
In what context?
In what context?
Okay. And that's quite simple then. The single most important question we should be asking ourselves is the world a better place for having me in it? Which is a big one to put down, but at the end of the day, it's really the only one that really matters when you get down to it. It comes back to my comment about energy earlier. Are you adding to the world or taking away from the world? Are you leaving the world in it? I don't want to go down, too much of a, kind of twee rabbit hole here, but as I've gotten older, maybe as our business has grown and our impact has grown, that responsibility to make sure that the people who work with us and, what we've created is better off for us having been in it. That for me is probably the single biggest one.
Gabby?
Mine was on a similar vein, not nearly as profound, obviously, but like, are you doing good in the world? I think at the end of the day, which is very simple. A less profound version of what Peter said.
You guys should get married. Gabby, you see, now you get to jump the shark with him. Gabby, what's the most important thing to let go of?
I think I said this earlier, and that is credit. Who gets the credit at the end of the day? I think there's very rarely an instance where it truly, truly matters. So I think once you let go of that, you can become a much happier person, much happier.
Pete?
Yeah, I was going to say ego. So thanks for that. But I'll
That's called a return serve.
Absolutely. But it is just so true, though. It is just so true. It's amazing what you can achieve when you don't care who gets the credit. So it just really is it is just such an important one. And to Gabby's point about collaboration, and if we all just got over ourselves a little bit and forgot about our agendas and what's in it for us, we could just achieve, I think, so much more than we do. But I'm trying to think if I can scramble for something else to let go of, and I think maybe the one would be to let go of some of our, I want to say rigidity, some of our dogma, or some of our incredible belief in our point of view, which maybe comes back to ego again. When you look at the world at the moment, you've been moving in this very, very kind of, nationalistic, polarizing kind of sense. And there's this arrogance and this my dogma is the right dogma. My dogma is, should overshadow yours. And that's just the cause of so much angst and pain and suffering, personally, professionally, societally.
Globally.
So if I think one thing should go of, it's just letting other people in, and again, you can see there's 2 or 3 themes that come through this, which is nice because we pre-planned this and script, obviously exactly land today. So, I'm glad to see it's threading through.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. We really urgently need to rediscover the lost art of civil disagreement.
Yeah, it's okay. Exactly. We don't have to agree. It's okay. But we don't have to. Disagreement does not equate, personal insult. And by extension, then,
or failure.
Global
disagreement doesn't equal failure,
Yeah. Anyway,
Pete, I will stay with you. What is a life well lived?
I think a life well lived is one that you look at, and you feel that you're spending your time doing good and doing what you want to do with that time. You feel that you have left the people around you, and you are, leaving the people around you generally, in a better state than you found them, and but I think a life well lived is one where you feel that you've moved the boulder further up the hill, whatever that boulder is to you, whatever is important to you. It's just feeling that you've made some kind of a difference, and I mean that difference could be, one where you saw the world, or one where you, I don't know, became an expert in classical literature, whatever that is. But it's got to, for me, it's hopefully feeling, and knowing that things are better because we were here.
Gabby, what's a life well lived?
Try and give my opinion. I'm a big believer in that love is the reason we're here, and above all else, I think that love is what it boils down to. Love of each other, love of, those around you, love of what you spend your time doing, what you commit to. And a life well lived is one where you can look back and say, I feel loved, and I know the people around me felt loved at any time, at all times. That no matter what I did or whatever I brought home, that love was, I received love despite, whatever happened. And that's how we want to raise our children. That's how we try to raise our children. That's how we try treat the people around us, with love and care.
I love all 3 of those answers. Now for the plus one. Gabby, what's the one question I should have asked you both, but I didn't?
When did you first realize you were in
I was trying to be respectful of the fact that it was not just about your romantic relationship, although I've had that radio in the back of my head since minute 2. Pete, what's the one question I should have asked you both but didn't?
I suppose there's the slightly kind of cheap shot territory of who's in charge at work and who's in charge at home, nice cheap shot, but I have to be honest, I don't really have one. I don't know what the plus one would be. I'd have to think about that a bit. I'm
going to take that as I've nailed the brief.
I think you've done it. I think you've done it.
Absolutely.
Well, look, I think you guys are absolute magic. I think this conversation has filled my cup in such an amazing way, and I think your teams are truly lucky to have the 2 of you hurricane around them, and God help your children if they're going to have to keep up with your insight, Pete. But thank you so much, both of you, for giving up the time to come and have a chat to us. I can't wait to see what you guys do together.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Making our lives feel slightly more exciting than they feel usually.
Because actually it's pretty boring. It's broken tumble dryers and night nappies. Got to get back to the dishwasher.